finally we get to the big five. And the big five, the five-factor model, this is what seems to be the growing consensus about the basic structure of personality. Study after study seems to be showing and confirming that you can basically identify personality as having a structure of 5 superordinate traits. Not 3, not 16, but 5. Okay? And factor analysis has been used over and over again with this. It's been done in different cultures. But bottom line is the big five identifies these 5 traits that that essentially more or less define the structure of personality. However, the number 5 represents the number of traits, but it doesn't tell you exactly what these traits are. That's where there's going to be some disagreement. When you do a factor analysis, if you remember, if you turn back to page 54 in the textbook, and we looked at the items that fell strongly on factor A, factor B, and factor C, we can pretty much easily give a name to each of those factors. I mean, a factor C is pretty clearly denial when it comes to coping with stress. But oftentimes it's not that easy to be able to name factors. You might find items that are very highly correlated with each other, but you're trying to really figure out, well, what does item 1 have to do with item 2? And trying to put it all together may be somewhat like putting a square peg in a round hole. You know, how do you get all these items to somehow fit together? Well, we know they fit together statistically. How do they fit together conceptually? How do we take these items and give it a name that makes sense? Okay? Well, there's going to be disagreement on that, because the task of labeling factors in a factor analysis kind of takes a little bit of creativity off, and it's not always such a cut and dry exercise. It's a subjective thing. So in other words, it's the researcher who does the research would be the one giving the name to the factor, and therefore so that's essentially what it comes from. Also, don't forget the same problem with what we talked about before about factor analysis in general. Depends on what you start with. Garbage in, garbage out. In other words, the items that are going into your factor analysis should be relevant to what it is you're trying to study. And it should be a complete list rather than an incomplete list. So that is what you need to remember too. So ultimately, one study's results are going to be different from another's. But even with these different studies, they are nevertheless coming up with 5 traits, 5 super traits. Well, let's not use Ising's term, but these superordinate traits that come from that we call the big 5. So let's start with the big 5. Let's name what the big 5 here. First one is extroversion. By the way, this should look familiar, right? Extroversion fits in on Ising's scale, which means Ising had something right if he was identifying extroversion as a super trait, because this one comes up very frequently. This one comes up all the time on the studies that come up with the 5 factors. But again, different researchers give them different labels: social adaptability, assertiveness, energy. If you're looking from a light, the researcher calls it, the Peabody and Goldberg, the life domain, would call extroversion power. But again, different researchers have different names. But again, now look at the common adjectives here: gregarious, energetic, outspoken. People who would score highly on those variables, who would say, I am very gregarious, which kind of means basically friendly. Friendly, shaking hands, that kind of thing. But, that would be someone who would score high on extrovert. Now, timid and seclusive, obviously, would be someone who would be low on the extroversion. But again, realizing that these 5 traits are two ends of a continuum. So extroversion reflects both being highly introverted or highly extroverted, and anywhere in between. Second factor is agreeableness. Agreeableness essentially has been labeled, again, conformity, friendly compliance, likability. Someone who is nice would be high on the agreeableness factor. And again, the life domain that Peabody and Goldberg talk about would be love in this case. And look at those adjectives: friendly, considerate, kind, good-natured. But spiteful and cold would be on the low end of agreeableness. Basically, someone who is high in agreeableness would be friendly. They wouldn't want to get into a lot of arguments or fights or anything like that. But someone who is low in agreeableness would probably be irritable, would probably be, you wouldn't get along well with others, and just, not particularly nice, would not be afraid of offending anybody, that kind of thing. But again, there are a lot of different adjectives that kind of fit into this particular factor. Conscientiousness. Someone who is conscientious, not conscious, conscientious. Look it up in the dictionary. Conscientiousness, kind of being responsible, being thorough. Teachers love conscientious students. Conscientious students take excellent notes. They do all the homework. They read the chapters before coming to class, that kind of thing. By the way, guys, as an aside here, you guys taking an online course, you have to be extra conscientious, even if it isn't necessarily part of your personality. You've got to do all the weekly assignments. You've got to keep up with your work. You've got to be doing everything you can, because you don't have to come to class at a particular time. You nevertheless have to do the work on your own schedule and make sure that you're keeping up with your own schedule. Okay. So, conscientiousness, responsibility, will to achieve. And again, the life domain would be work, and that would make sense. The idea being that a conscientious person does good work and does the job that they need to do. So adjectives represent cautious, serious, planful, hardworking. Careless and frivolous obviously would be on the low end of conscientiousness. The fourth factor is emotionality, also often called neuroticism. So focus on the end, the neuroticism there. There are, are you going to be emotional? Are you highly controlled emotionally, or is your emotion highly changeable? Emotional lability, like emotional changeability. And this reflects your affect, your emotion, okay? People who are high in emotionality or neuroticism, nervous, anxious, excitable, high-strung. Do any of you fit that category? On the other hand, people who are low in emotionality or low in neuroticism would be calm, cool, and collected. They would be composed. And these are people who are not going to let stress get them freaking out. People who are high in neuroticism, they're very reactive to stress, and their heart races, everything like that. They have that quick trigger response to stress. So something's going on biologically, physiologically with them. That fight or flight response is kicking in with people with high scores in neuroticism. Finally, factor 5, intellect, also called openness to experience. The openness to experience, so this is kind of a harder one to define, because this is one of those factors where there's a lot of different items that may or may not go together. Imaginative, polished, creative, knowledgeable. On the one hand, on the high end, and the low end, simple and unreflective. The relevant life domain being intellect. But really, this is, the openness, maybe kind of like open-minded, you know, thinking deeply about different things. Creative has been talked about. So, but really, this one is kind of the mushiest factor of the five. This one is the one that's been hardest to define. Extroversion, very easy to define, but openness is kind of a different one. Now, here's a hint if you wanted to make sure that you can remember all of the different five factors. Take out a pen and paper and write down the word ocean. An ocean will give you an acronym for the different, for the five different factors. The O would actually stand for openness. The C would stand for conscientiousness. The E would stand for extroversion. The A would stand for agreeableness, and the N would stand for neuroticism. So if you want to remember what the five factors are, what the big five factors are, think of the ocean, and you'll be able to remember. Okay, so is the jury the big five? Well, there's still a lot that we don't know. There's still a lot that we could still need to find out when it comes to the big five. One thing is, does the big five include all traits, or does it only include, have we included enough information into the big five to really describe personality? Yeah, what about good and evil? Interestingly enough, good and evil is not really put into the big five. Well, many people would say that good and evil are the most important dimensions of personality. Certainly, if you're taking a point of view from a religious point of view, good and evil are central. But good and evil is nowhere to be found in the big five. I mean, you could be low in agreeableness, but does that necessarily mean you're evil? Maybe not. You could be low in conscientiousness, meaning you're kind of irresponsible. Does that mean you're evil? Not necessarily. But basically, you can you can definitely make the case that maybe something is missing in the big five. Another problem with the big five is that maybe with the big five we are, in making these superordinate traits, these big general traits to describe personality, the problem is that those big super traits are probably not going to do a very good job of predicting specific behaviors. You're probably better off using the more specific traits within those superordinate traits. Those would probably do a better job of predicting specific behaviors. So if your goal as a personality psychologist is to use personality to predict behavior, maybe your general score on agreeableness as that factor may only give limited predictability. But if you go back to going back to agreeableness, maybe good-natured may be a better predictor of specific behaviors than the general category of agreeableness. So that's one of the things to consider.